She knows. I'm telling you, get them sold on this egg stuff. Now, anybody that wants to complain about disruption and chaos, remember, you wanted kids. So I don't want to hear it. When I started seminary at Eden Theological Seminary in St. Louis, first class that you went to was Old Testament. It was taught by Professor John Brocky, who was, he just thought he was all that and a bag of chips. He was going to intimidate us, and he was because that's how it worked when he was in seminary. Well, when he went to seminary, you went high school, college, seminary. And then it was your career. And you either went into the ministry or you went into teaching, got your PhD and taught. But you followed it and you were fairly young. When I was in seminary, the average age was 51. And all but 3 of us were second career students. So we had families, we had gone through life experience and things like that. So all this, we're going to tear down your faith and rebuild it. It's like, dude, where were you when? And we started, each one of us, listing off the different catastrophes that we had gone through in our life that our faith had carried us through. So he decided he would get even with us. And he would make us write exegetical papers. Exegetical papers. Well, you got a doctorate, Dave. Surely you wrote an exegetical paper at some time or another. Well, probably not, because that's something that is set just for those of us that are stupid enough to go into theological training and education. An exegetical paper is where you take ready, here's another cool word, pericope. You like that? Like any specialty. You have to have cool little words that only you know what they mean so you can sound exceptionally smart. Now, I think in my 2.5 years here, I've never used that word because I don't have a whole lot of use for those little coinages, but every once in a while they're nice to know that I still remember them. Anyway, a pericope is, all it is like a few verses. It's just taking something and studying that. So you had to take a few verses and then you had to write a 50-page paper on those few verses, tearing it apart, looking at it in Greek and looking at it in Hebrew if that was the case, and it was a mess. I hated it. But one of the cool things that I learned in the process was that if you're going to really look at a passage in the Bible, you can't just look at that passage. You have to look at what comes before, and even more important is to look at what comes after, so that you can put the verse in some kind of context. Now, when you follow the lectionary, as I do for a discipline, because it, quite frankly, forces me sometimes to deal with scriptures that I wouldn't necessarily pay any attention to. When you're dealing with the lectionary, they give you a pericope, just one small passage, and say, okay, that's what you're going to preach about. That's what the music's going to be about. That's what all the prayers are going to be guided towards. So as I was looking at the passage for this week, the one that everybody knows, because within the passage that Phil shared with us is John 3:16, and everybody knows that. Even people that aren't Christian know John 3:16 from Super Bowls and World Series and golf outings, where the guy with the wild, crazy hair has the big sign that says John 3:16, and the announcers feel the need to say what John 3:16 is every time. It's just one of those verses that are branded into our souls. So I figured, okay, everybody knows this one. And the story of Nicodemus, yeah, okay, he snuck in, blah, 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 blah. So I thought, well, I'm going to see what comes after it. It was very enlightening. So I'd just like to share a few thoughts, not on what Phil read, but what comes after what Phil read. after that passage, that section that we all know so well, that is never included in the lectionary anywhere at any time. So it goes on, Jesus saying, "And this is the judgment, that the light has come into the world. And people love darkness rather than light because their deeds were evil. For all who do evil hate the light and do not come to the light, so that their deeds may not be exposed. But those who do what is true come to the light, so that it may be clearly seen that their deeds have been done in God." As I was reading that, and as I do, reflect and pray on it, keeping the events of the day in mind, I realized that we have truly done an exceptional job at living in the darkness, at closing our eyes to the light, at choosing to not do anything. Which, and again I wrote this one down so I could quote it from Edmund Burke, "All that's necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing." That people close their eyes, that they don't see what's in front of them. The old, hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. And we as people have become very, very, very talented at that. See, we know what's right. We know what's expected of us, yet for a plethora of reasons, we choose to ignore the right, to ignore the path of goodness and compassion. And the overwhelming majority of time and reasons that we do it is because by closing our eyes, by not paying attention, it makes our lives much, much, much easier. Because what happens when you see an evil out there? No matter how small or large it might be, you see and identify that evil out there, and then you say something about it. Well, that does a couple of things right off the bat. First, it puts you out there. Now people are looking at you. "Seth, what do you mean you didn't like that?" Well, now all of a sudden, Seth becomes them. Because most of us don't want to have anything to do with or think about whatever it might be that Seth is finding to be offensive and evil. So now all those people that used to be Seth say, "Seth, my brother, how you doing? Yeah, this is great." Now they look at Seth and say, because Seth has identified himself, he has stuck out from the crowd, he has made himself a target. Now anybody and everybody, they have fodder. And we don't like to do that. For the most part, we would enjoy going through life totally nameless and faceless, just enjoying the fruits of our labor and the blessings that God has given us because God likes us better than everybody else. That's the way we look at it. So that's one of the reasons we don't like to see it. Another is, "Seth, you're right. I can't believe I didn't see it. What are you going to do?" Well, now all of a sudden Seth becomes the point man. And now anything that's going to happen to address that evil that's out there comes from the mind and the spirit and the soul and the hands and the efforts of Seth. And if it works, and if we address that evil, and if we are able to take care of it and bring justice and righteousness and compassion to the world, I did a heck of a job. But if it does not work, if the evil continues on, if the evil gets worse, boy, did you screw up. That's just the way it works. The other is identifying with Seth and saying, okay, we're in this together now, Seth, let's go for it. Now we have put ourselves into opposition with the rest of the world, because the overwhelming majority of people don't want anything to do with addressing whatever evil it is that we have said is out there and needs to be addressed. So now we become part of the problem. And people look at us now and identify us as an evil. And we don't like that. And it's things that are out there that we all know are out there, and not just Seth seeing them, but evil out there. Once every 10 minutes, right now, a child in Africa dies. Just in Africa. It goes like once every 3 minutes when you do the whole world. Once every 10 minutes, a child in Africa dies because he or she does not have proper nutrition. Forget the medical care. You bring the medical care into it, it goes down. More children, less minutes. But just 1 in 10 dies because they don't have enough to eat or drink. How is it that we are not so appalled at that we are up in arms tearing down the Capitol until they fix the problem, or at the very least address the problem? Is there anything more evil in the world than a child suffering, especially needlessly, or because of neglect? If there were a family of 3 kids in St. Johnsbury that you knew for a fact were suffering severely because of neglect, my guess is the overwhelming majority of us gathered here would find a way to do something about it. Am I not correct? Just nod your heads. Or don't nod your heads because you don't want to think about it. Yes, we would, but this is happening over in Africa. Now, what do we know about Africa? It's far away. What do we know about Africa? For the most part, they don't have much that we want. And quite frankly, if they've had what we want, we've already gone over and gotten it. What do we know about Africa? The overwhelming majority of people that live there are Africans. What do we know about Africans? They look different than us. They are dark-skinned. They talk differently. Their culture is completely foreign to us for the most part. And they live in what we would consider to be a primitive culture and society. So it's easy for us to say, who cares? They're different from us. So we can close our eyes. We can live in the darkness, telling ourselves that I didn't do anything bad to the Africans, and allow ourselves to be in that midnight time of the soul when it's so dark and it's so black. We choose not to open our eyes to see the light, to see the evil, to identify it, and then to address it. To reach out with all that we have at our disposal, all the blessings that God has bestowed upon us, to try to find a way to help the people that are out there, in particular the children that are out there that are suffering. Now, I know for a fact, on my way, as people are leaving, when I'm standing back there on my little hug rug and people are walking by saying, oh, hi, 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 I'm going to get a whole bunch of, you know what, I really didn't particularly care for that message today. You made me feel bad. You made me feel like I don't care. Like I'm evil. I want you to keep one thing in mind. One thing. I didn't say anything that Jesus didn't say. See, the difference is we can read Jesus' words and we can say, oh, Jesus, you gave it to those Pharisees. You socked them good. Those Sadducees, whoa, you let them know. All those terrible people back there in first century Israel and Palestine, yeah, you sure told them, Jesus. All I'm doing is bringing the story that Jesus told to them to us. Putting us in the place of the Pharisees, of the Sadducees, of those that heard Jesus speak. See, one of the things I am called to do, one of the things we are all called to do, is to make the message of the gospel, the words of Jesus, make them not something that happened in a vacuum 2,000 years ago, but help us to realize that they speak to us as clearly and surely today as they did when they came forth from Jesus' mouth. That the faults and the problems that Jesus pointed out of the people in his time exist at least as much in our time here. And the people that lived in darkness that Jesus talked about, well, we still exist today. With eyes closed. With blinders on. Choosing to shut out the light. Choosing to shut out the call. Lent is a time for reflection and for introspection. A time for each and every one of us, and a time for us as a congregation to decide who we are, and more importantly, whose we are. And today the question quite simply is, are we children of the darkness? Or are we children of the light? As always and every time, Jesus then and Jesus now allows us the choice. How will we choose? How will you choose? Amen.